So now that we've talked about factory methods and how we can use a factory method to set the wheels in motion, let's start talking about all the completion stage methods that get called by later stages in this sequential stream pipeline. And we're going to start by talking about the download image async completion stage method. Sorry, we're going to talk about the download image async method, which uses some completion stage methods. So as you can see here, once we've set the wheels in motion through having check URL cached async, return a completable future to an optional URL, the next thing that happens in the pipeline is the download image async method is called. And as we'll see, this method takes a completable future to an optional URL, and when that completable future triggers, we'll then go ahead and asynchronously download that image if there's one that we need to download, if it's not empty, if the optional is not empty. And that'll then return a completable future to an optional image. And if it turned out that we had an empty optional, then it'll just be empty on the way out. And you'll see why in a second. What we get back from this is a stream of completable futures to optional images, which will have a value if the image is in the process of being downloaded, or it'll be empty if it's already been cached. We have to do this because there's no easy way to get rid of these things, because you can't filter on completable futures. OK, so here is download image async. And as you can see, download image async takes one parameter, which is a completable future to an optional URL. And when that future triggers, in other words, once it's completed, once we figured out whether the file exists or not, then it calls the then apply async method. And this method will register this action that won't be executed immediately, of course, but it'll be executed when URL future completes. So let's take a look and see what this particular action does, the meat of this action. The meat of this action says, once the future is completed, then take the optional URL that that future pointed to and call its map method. Now, this map method is not a stream map method. This map method is a method defined on optional. And what optional does is optional says, if this optional is empty, ignore the action that's passed in. If this optional is not empty, in other words, we've actually got a URL that we want to download, apply this particular action or this particular behavior. So let's assume for sake of argument that we have a URL that has a value. In that case, we're going to call the blocking download method, which of course will run in the background because it was called from the context of then apply async. And what will happen then is this will occur in the context of the executor. And if you recall, the executor is the common fork join pool, which we've talked about before. And as we'll see in a second, blocking download is going to use the managed blocker mechanism built into the common fork join pool in order to do this in a way that will expand the fork join pool as needed to grow if we have to. And I'll show you how that works here. So here's the blocking download method. This is the method that actually downloads the file. As you can see, it calls blocking task.call and manage block. And this particular call, if you go back and look at the stuff that we talked about here in this discussion, what this thing does is it wraps up the managed blocker interface, which auto expands the common fork join pool to handle the blocking image download. And so what's happening here is that this lambda supplier, or supplier lambda, will be called in the context of the managed blocker, and that will then go ahead and download the actual content. So this will actually go out and grab the content at that URL and download it. And because it's called in the context of the managed blocker, it won't end up stealing a thread from the pool that'll actually arrange to add a new thread to the worker pool to compensate for the fact that this call is going to block. And that's important to get the scalability that we've talked about numerous times here. Okay, so that's basically just kind of showing how this blocking download method works. Come back over here, you can see that what we get back as the result of this is a completable future to an optional image, and that'll either be empty if we want to ignore this image altogether, or it'll have the actual image object's contents after the image finishes downloading. So when the image finishes downloading, then that optional, assuming we have a valid image, will end up having a value, and that will be the image that was downloaded, and we get a completable future back from that. Okay, so that's the first part of the discussion of completion stage methods. As you can see, we focused here on then apply async.